Can you imagine your life without a fridge? Me neither. Before refrigeration, food preservation wasn't a convenience and luxury we have today. You either found a way to preserve food, or you didn't survive. But not so long ago, these 25 foods kept our ancestors alive without a fridge. Imagine being out in the wilderness with no fridge, pantry, or cooler, yet needing a meal that can last for months. This is where one of history's most ingenious survival foods comes in, a compact powerhouse of nutrition first created by indigenous peoples and later embraced by explorers and fur traders. This was fuel for long journeys, harsh winters, and uncertain times. Pemmican combines dried meat, usually bison, deer, or elk, with rendered fat and occasionally dried berries for a touch of flavor. The result was a high-calorie, long-lasting, and portable food that could survive the elements better than a modern snack bar. It was so practical that fur traders in the 18th and 19th centuries relied on it as their main sustenance during expeditions. Properly made pemmican could last years without refrigeration. The rendered fat sealed out air, keeping the meat preserved and edible for ages. The word pemmican comes from the Cree word pemmican, meaning fat grease. It may not sound glamorous, but this ingenious food earned its place as one of history's most reliable meals. When settlers headed west, they didn't pack croissants or delicate pastries. Instead, they relied on a humble yet sturdy creation that could endure tough conditions and long journeys. Known as Mormon Johnny Cake, this hearty cornmeal flatbread became a cornerstone of survival for early pioneers, particularly those of the Latter-day Saints movement. Made with just a few basic ingredients, cornmeal, water, a touch of salt, and sometimes molasses, this simple bread was baked or fried on an open flame. It didn't spoil quickly, and its compact size made it easy to carry during migration across the American frontier. For preservation, dried cornmeal was a lifesaver. It could last for months if kept dry, ensuring settlers always had the means to whip up this filling staple. Culturally, the Johnny Cake symbolized resilience and resourcefulness. It wasn't luxurious, but it represented the determination to thrive under difficult circumstances. While it started as survival food, it later became a regional favorite in parts of the U.S., cementing its place in culinary history. Mormon Johnny Cake isn't exactly cake. It's more of a cross between cornbread and a pancake, proof that pioneers didn't have time for fancy names. After all, when you're blazing trails, it's the calories, not the presentation, that count. Long before bubblegum became the neon pink, sugar-loaded treat we know today, chewing gum came straight from the forest. Pine resin, or hardened sap from pine trees, was nature's original chewing gum. Indigenous peoples across North America were the first to use it, not just for its chewy texture, but also for its practical benefits. The process was simple but effective. Sap was collected directly from trees, sometimes mixed with beeswax for added flexibility, and then allowed to harden into a chewable form. Its natural stickiness may have made it a nightmare for pockets, but as a shelf-stable treat, it had serious staying power. It was also believed to soothe sore gums and keep teeth clean. Culturally, pine resin chewing gum reflected the ingenuity of Native American traditions. Settlers later adopted the practice, and it remained popular until commercial gum took over in the 19th century. Some people added charcoal to the gum, creating an early version of minty fresh for the pioneer set. It wasn't exactly double mint, but it got the job done. While modern gum promises bright smiles, pine resin gum reminds us that even the simplest ideas can stick around for centuries. Literally. For centuries, if you wanted meat that wouldn't spoil, salt was your best friend. Long before refrigeration, people preserved pork by packing it in salt, a method so effective that salted meat became a cornerstone of diets for sailors, pioneers, and soldiers alike. The process was as simple as it was transformative. Fresh cuts of pork were heavily salted and sometimes smoked. This drew out moisture, creating an inhospitable environment for bacteria. The result was meat that could survive a transatlantic journey or a winter on the frontier. It wasn't fancy, but it worked. Salt pork, with its high fat content, provided essential calories and was a key ingredient in hearty dishes like stews and baked beans. Country ham, on the other hand, became a southern delicacy. Aged for months or even years, its bold, salty flavor was so intense that just a thin slice could elevate a meal. Country hams were sometimes aged in attics, where changing temperatures actually enhanced their flavor. Talk about climate control, 19th century style. Whether it was fueling pioneers or gracing holiday tables, salted meat proved that a little salt could go a long way, sometimes across entire continents. When survival depended on what you could carry, one food stood out as the ultimate road snack: dried meat. Indigenous peoples of North America perfected the art of making jerky long before it became a gas station staple. Using techniques that were as practical as they were ingenious, they ensured meat could last for weeks or even months without spoiling. The preservation method was simple but effective. Thin strips of meat, often bison, deer, or elk, were cut and dried in the sun or smoked over a fire. The low moisture and high protein content made it lightweight, portable, and perfect for long journeys. Early settlers and traders quickly adopted the practice, turning jerky into a frontier favorite. Jerky's cultural roots run deep, especially among Native American communities, where it was a way to maximize resources. Every part of the animal was used, embodying a respect for nature that modern sustainability movements could learn from. With its dense nutrition and near indestructibility, jerky became a food that could outlast even the toughest trails. It wasn't gourmet, but when you're miles from civilization, chewy beats hungry every time. Long before sugar was king, nature had already perfected its sweetest invention, honey. And when stored in its original waxy packaging, the honeycomb, it was practically immortal. Archaeologists have even uncovered honey thousands of years old in Egyptian tombs, still safe to eat. The secret lies in the honeycomb itself. Beeswax seals the honey, protecting it from air and moisture. Combined with honey's naturally low water content and antibacterial properties, it creates an environment where bacteria just can't survive, making it nature's edible time capsule. For early Americans, sealed honeycomb was an essential. Colonists, Native Americans, and pioneers used honey for everything from baking to soothing sore throats. It was a rare treat that could last indefinitely, making it invaluable for long winters or journeys. The wax could be chewed like gum, and any leftover wax was sometimes used for candles. And while it didn't require any fancy preparation, sealed honeycomb offered dense calories, trace nutrients, and natural sweetness. If you think acorns are just for squirrels, think again. For indigenous peoples across North America, acorns were a dietary cornerstone, transformed into a versatile ingredient, acorn flour. But before they could be eaten, these little nuts needed some serious prep work. Acorns are packed with tannins, bitter compounds that can upset your stomach. To make them edible, they were shelled, ground into a coarse meal, and repeatedly soaked in water to leach out the tannins. Once dried, the resulting flour could be stored for months, sometimes even years, if kept cool and dry. It was the ultimate long-lasting pantry item. Nutritionally, acorn flour was a powerhouse. Rich in carbohydrates and fats, it provided slow-burning energy, perfect for people with physically demanding lifestyles. It could be made into porridge, bread, or even dumplings, offering a hearty meal that didn't rely on fragile crops like wheat. Culturally, acorns held deep significance. Oak trees were considered gifts of the land, and acorn processing was often a communal activity. Some indigenous groups even used specific tools, like rock mortars carved into bedrock, to grind the nuts. Certain oak species produced sweeter acorns, making them more prized. Imagine being the lucky one with the dessert oak in your backyard. When life gives you choke cherries, a fruit so tart it makes lemons look sweet, you don't eat them raw. Instead, you turn them into something extraordinary, like choke cherry syrup. For indigenous peoples and early settlers, it was a clever way to preserve the fruit and make use of a wild harvest. Choke cherries, native to North America, were boiled down with water and sometimes sweetened with honey or sugar to create a thick, tangy syrup. This process concentrated the flavor and ensured the fruit could last far beyond its brief season. The syrup could then be stored in jars or crocks, providing a burst of flavor during the colder months when fresh fruit was scarce. Nutritionally, choke cherries were small but mighty. Packed with antioxidants and vitamins, they offered a health boost that paired nicely with their versatility. The syrup could be drizzled on bread, mixed into porridge, or even used as a glaze for meat. Culturally, choke cherries held deep importance for many indigenous tribes. They were also used as medicine. The bark and seeds were used in remedies, and the fruit itself was seen as a gift from the land. The name choke cherry comes from the fruit's astringency, which can literally make your throat tighten if eaten raw. Thankfully, with a little ingenuity and a lot of syrup, they became one of the sweetest survival foods in history. Centuries before the invention of tortillas, tamales, or even nachos, Native American cultures were already perfecting the art of using corn in ways that made it both more digestible and more durable. The technique used was nixtamalization. By soaking and cooking corn kernels in an alkaline solution, usually lime water, the process released essential nutrients and made corn easier to grind into masa, the base for many beloved dishes. Masa isn't just any dough, it's corn transformed through fermentation, a key to both its preservation and nutritional benefits. Once treated, it could be stored for several days or dried for longer preservation, ensuring a steady food source during the harvest season. This made it the ultimate survival food long before commercial kitchens got their hands on it. Masa represented more than sustenance. It was a symbol of resourcefulness and the deep relationship between people and the land. It was the foundation of countless recipes across North and South America, linking indigenous communities across vast regions. Before there were food trucks selling tamales on every corner, there was the humble green corn tamale. Originating from indigenous groups across North America, this dish was a staple made with fresh, young corn, perfectly tender and sweet. Wrapped in corn husks, it was a practical, easy-to-prepare meal that could be eaten on the go, which made it ideal for people constantly on the move, whether they were farmers, traders, or travelers. While green corn tamales were often made with freshly harvested corn, their preservation wasn't an afterthought. When stored properly, these tamales could be kept for days, thanks to their husk-wrapped packaging. In some cases, they were even dried to preserve them for long periods, becoming a portable, non-perishable food that could be taken on journeys. Culturally, tamales were much more than just a meal. They symbolized community and connection, as families would often come together to prepare large batches. The green corn tamale, in particular, was tied to harvest festivals, where corn was celebrated as a gift from the earth. Nutritionally, green corn tamales were a good source of carbohydrates, offering energy for long, physically demanding days. In the world of early American survival foods, sometimes simplicity and ingenuity combined to create something extraordinary. The Cherokee, for example, had a tradition of making bean bread, a dish that was as much practical as it was essential. Beans were a cornerstone of their diet, providing a protein-rich food source that could be preserved and stored for long periods. Combined with cornmeal, this humble bread became an important way to stretch available resources. To prepare it, beans were cooked, mashed, and mixed with cornmeal, then baked or steamed to form a dense, filling loaf. While the ingredients were simple, the result was a bread that could keep you going through long winters or tough times. Once made, it could last for days and, like many traditional foods, could be adapted based on what was available. For the Cherokee, bean bread represented the resourcefulness of their people, a food that could be shared, preserved, and passed down through generations. Beans are rich in fiber, making this bread not just a source of calories, but a natural way to stay regular. It's the original comfort food, hearty, satisfying, and full of wisdom that stood the test of time. Long before root beer was a soda fountain staple, there was sassafras tea, a beverage made from the roots of the sassafras tree. Early settlers, Native Americans, and pioneers used it as a flavorful drink, but it was also cherished for its medicinal qualities. The roots were steeped to create a fragrant, slightly spicy tea that could be enjoyed hot or cold. Sassafras was easy to preserve too. The roots could be dug up and stored for later use, keeping well throughout the year. a perfect ingredient to gather when fresh herbs were out of season or when the winter cold made sourcing ingredients a challenge. It was the multi-purpose drink of its time, satisfying both the body and the spirit. Historically, sassafras tea was used to treat everything from colds to digestive issues, and even as a mild diuretic. It was a go-to for settlers looking for a home remedy when traditional medicine wasn't easily available. In fact, sassafras was so valued that it was one of the first plants exported from North America to Europe in the 1600s. Sassafras was once used in the original formula for root beer before it was banned by the FDA due to concerns over its safrole content, a compound thought to be carcinogenic. When times were tough, people had to get creative with their cooking. Corn dodgers, small, dense cornmeal biscuits, were a practical solution for hard times. Made from cornmeal, water, and sometimes a bit of fat, they were a filling, simple food, ideal for pioneers and farmers looking to stretch their rations. Often cooked in a skillet or pot, these little nuggets of cornmeal could keep for days, making them a perfect survival food. The preservation of corn dodgers was easy. They didn't spoil quickly, and because of their dense, hearty nature, they could be eaten over multiple meals. This practicality made them a staple on the frontier, and during the Civil War, especially when fresh bread was hard to come by. Culturally, corn dodgers were part of a larger Southern tradition of corn-based foods, reflecting the region's reliance on corn as a dietary staple. Corn was plentiful and affordable, so it only made sense that it would show up in many forms in Southern kitchens, including the iconic cornbread. Interestingly, corn dodgers were also sometimes served with syrup or gravy, adding a little sweetness or savor to an otherwise plain dish. In the world of baking, there's one ancient technique that's managed to survive the test of time: sourdough. Before the convenience of commercial yeast, pioneers and settlers relied on sourdough starter to leaven their bread. This unique culture of wild yeast and bacteria created a tangy flavor while helping dough rise, and it was passed down through generations. A sourdough starter could be preserved indefinitely, as long as it was fed with flour and water, making it one of the original live foods. Historically, sourdough was essential for those who couldn't rely on quick and easy store-bought yeast. It was the bread of California gold rush miners who carried their starters through the rugged terrain to bake fresh loaves amidst the chaos. Even today, sourdough remains a beloved tradition, particularly in San Francisco, where the local climate and bacteria create a distinctive taste that can't be replicated anywhere else. Not only did sourdough provide nutritional value with its complex carbohydrates and probiotic benefits, but it was also a practical, low-maintenance food. Once established, the starter required minimal attention, making it a reliable companion for home bakers. When early settlers in America wanted to fill their bellies with something hearty and long-lasting, they turned to hominy grits. The process to make them, known as nixtamalization, involved soaking corn in an alkaline solution, usually made from lye or lime, to remove the hulls. This method not only made the corn easier to grind, but also increased its nutritional value by releasing niacin, which was essential for avoiding diseases like pellagra. Hominy grits were a staple in many American households, especially in the South. Their cultural significance can't be overstated. Grits were more than just food. They were comfort, tradition, and a social experience. Whether served with butter, cheese, or gravy, grits were versatile, with the power to turn a simple meal into something memorable. Preserving grits was straightforward. Once ground into a fine meal, they could be stored for months, making them an ideal food for times when fresh produce wasn't available. This made grits a go-to option in the days before refrigeration, especially during long winters or in remote areas. In addition to being easy to store, grits were a rich source of carbohydrates and fiber, providing lasting energy without requiring complicated preparation. Before refrigeration, preserving meat was an art, one that involved drying, salting, and smoking. Smoked meats, particularly smoked duck breast, were a favorite among early Americans and indigenous peoples. Smoking meat over a low fire for hours or even days not only imparted a rich flavor, but also preserved it for months. making it an essential part of survival in pre-refrigeration days. The process of smoking involves both curing and drying the meat, creating a barrier to bacteria and spoilage. While today we might reach for a quick snack, early settlers smoked meats for their practical, long-term storage abilities. They didn't have refrigerators, but had a smoky solution that worked wonders. Culturally, smoked meats were as much a tradition as a necessity. Smoked duck, for example, could be eaten on its own, mixed with grains, or used in soups. The rich, savory flavor made it a favorite during celebrations and in everyday meals. It was a symbol of the resourcefulness and ingenuity of the past. From a nutritional standpoint, smoked duck breast offers protein and essential fats, ideal for sustaining energy levels. Before the age of refrigeration, preserving vegetables was a matter of survival. Salt pickles were a staple on American homesteads, a simple yet effective way to keep food from spoiling. The technique is straightforward. Vegetables, typically cucumbers, are submerged in brine, allowing the salt to draw out moisture and create a barrier against harmful bacteria. This not only extended the shelf life of the produce, but also added a tangy, salty flavor that made them a beloved side dish. Pickling was crucial for settlers who faced long winters or periods of isolation. Early pioneers pickled everything from cabbage to beans, storing them in large crocks that would last throughout the year. Salt pickles were an affordable and practical solution, as salt was readily available and the process didn't require fancy tools or complex ingredients. Beyond their practical value, salt pickles became a cultural touchstone. They were served at almost every meal, especially during harvest time when fresh produce was abundant. In terms of nutrition, pickles provided a dose of probiotics from the fermentation process, which helped support gut health. They were also a great source of hydration, thanks to the brine. Apple cider vinegar has been a fixture in American homes for centuries, predating refrigeration by a long shot. The process of fermentation was harnessed to create this tangy liquid that could preserve fruits, vegetables, and even meats, all while offering a sharp, zesty flavor to dishes. Early settlers knew its value beyond just culinary uses. Apple cider vinegar was an essential part of their health regimens, believed to help with digestion, fight off infections, and even serve as a general tonic for the body. In fact, it was a multitasker before multitasking was cool. For preservation, apple cider vinegar works through its acidity. High acidity levels inhibit the growth of bacteria, which is why it was commonly used for pickling vegetables and fruits, making it a pantry essential on homesteads. Canning with apple cider vinegar kept food fresh and safe without refrigeration, and as an added bonus, it gave everything a delightful punch. Nutritionally, it's packed with potassium, magnesium, and probiotics from fermentation, which supports gut health. The vinegar's practicality extended beyond the kitchen, too. People used it for cleaning, for medicinal purposes, and even as a natural insect repellent. Boiled peanuts have been a Southern delicacy for centuries, long before refrigeration became a household fixture. Early settlers relied on this snack not only for its satisfying taste, but for its practicality. Boiling peanuts in salty water allowed them to be preserved for long periods, making them an essential survival food. With a quick cook and the right salt content, they could be eaten fresh or saved for later. Culturally, boiled peanuts are as Southern as sweet tea, often enjoyed at barbecues, roadside stands, and even football games. They're also a common snack for travelers heading through rural regions, offering a taste of tradition with every handful. As a food that could withstand heat and travel well without refrigeration, boiled peanuts were an easy and reliable source of protein for the working class and soldiers alike. From a nutritional standpoint, they're packed with protein, fiber, and healthy fats, making them a filling, energy-boosting snack. Plus, they're full of antioxidants, which give them a surprising health benefit. In the days before refrigeration, nothing went to waste on a farm, and pork skins were no exception. Cracklings, made by rendering the fat from pig skins, were a tasty way to preserve every part of the pig. This method not only helped stretch resources, but also added flavor and nutrition to meals. The crispy result is a beloved Southern snack, often crumbled over cornbread or eaten straight from the jar. In terms of preservation, Cracklings were easy to store. Once fried and sealed, they could be kept for weeks without refrigeration. The high-fat content acted as a natural preservative, which made them especially useful during the colder months when fresh food was scarce. They also provided a good source of protein and fat, important nutrients when food was more difficult to come by. Culturally, cracklings became a symbol of frugality and resourcefulness, especially during hard times like the Great Depression. It was a food born out of necessity that carried a certain satisfaction, a reminder that ingenuity often tastes best. What you might not know is that cracklings have historical significance beyond the kitchen. In colonial America, they were often used as barter items in communities that valued self-sufficiency. For centuries, parched corn was a go-to survival food that could be eaten on the trail, in the fields, or stored for winter. Native Americans were among the first to master the technique of drying corn over a fire, preserving it for long-term use. As they learned to parch the kernels, they made it a staple in their diet. Simple, reliable, and portable. To prepare parched corn, the kernels were heated until they popped and hardened, allowing them to be ground into flour or eaten as a snack. This process of drying and roasting preserved the corn without refrigeration, providing a source of energy and nutrients during lean times. In addition to its practicality, parched corn played a cultural role. It was a food often shared during times of hardship, passed around in communal settings. The dried kernels were durable enough to survive long journeys and harsh conditions, making them an essential part of American frontier diets. Parched corn was once used as a currency of sorts, traded in early American settlements for goods or services. Talk about a snack that truly paid off. Beyond its simple preparation, parched corn was a lifeline during the challenging times, offering nutrients like carbs, fiber, and a bit of protein. Long before refrigerators or freezers were a household staple, dried fruit was the go-to method for preserving sweet and nutritious snacks. Prized by early settlers, dried plums and figs were easy to store and packed a punch of natural sweetness. By drying the fruits, families could enjoy them all year long, even when fresh produce was out of season. Drying techniques were simple yet effective, cutting fruit into slices and leaving it in the sun or using a wood stove's heat for days at a time. This process removed moisture, halting bacterial growth and preventing spoilage. The result was a shelf-stable treat that traveled well, whether across the plains or on long ocean voyages. In addition to their practicality, dried fruits had a rich cultural significance. They became essential in pioneer diets, a reliable source of vitamins and energy during harsh winters. Dried figs and plums were also used in religious and ceremonial events, providing a touch of sweetness in otherwise austere times. Dried plums are the ultimate digestive aid, practically a natural remedy, packed with fiber and vitamins. They were cherished not just as a snack, but for their health benefits, long before prunes became the punchline of jokes. Before modern preservation techniques, dried mushrooms were a go-to pantry staple for families looking to extend their food supply. Whether in the European countryside or early American homesteads, mushrooms were carefully harvested, sliced, and dried to be used during the long winter months when fresh produce was scarce. A method as old as time, the process was simple. Dry them in the sun or over low heat, sealing in flavor and nutrients. Dried mushrooms were an essential part of many cultures' diets. In Europe, they were used to enhance stews and soups, adding an earthy depth of flavor. In Native American traditions, they were also cherished, often integrated into hearty dishes and relied upon for sustenance during colder months. Over time, dried mushrooms became an important culinary ingredient across the globe. Nutritionally, these mushrooms pack a punch. Full of antioxidants, vitamin D, and essential minerals, they provide health benefits that extend beyond their flavor. Surprisingly, they can even help boost your immune system, giving your body a little extra defense in the colder seasons. When it comes to survival food, canned sardines are a testament to the power of preservation. Dating back to the early 19th century, this humble tin can turn seafood into a long-lasting commodity. First mass-produced in France around 1820, sardines were a solution for keeping fish edible long after it was caught. especially in an era when refrigeration didn't exist. Packed tightly into cans, the fish could be stored for months, even years, providing a vital source of protein during lean times. Canning was a game changer, not only for the practical aspects of food storage, but also for transportation. Sardines quickly became a staple for sailors, explorers, and workers across the world. Nutritionally, these tiny fish are packed with omega-3 fatty acids, calcium, and vitamin D. So, if you're looking to boost your heart health or your bone density, sardines are an easy and tasty option. They also happen to be incredibly versatile. Toss them on a salad, throw them in a pasta, or just enjoy them straight from the can. It's like a little treasure chest of nutrients. Buttermilk is a real piece of history in a glass. This tangy byproduct of churning butter has been around for centuries, originating long before modern refrigeration and mass production. In early American households, buttermilk was as common as milk itself, used in everything from baking to cooking. Back then, it was a natural way to preserve leftover milk after the cream had been churned into butter, ensuring nothing went to waste. When it comes to preservation, buttermilk's acidity works as a natural preservative. It can be kept in a cool place for a few days, and when refrigerated, it can last for up to a week. In fact, the live cultures in buttermilk, similar to yogurt, can actually extend the shelf life of the dairy, making it a practical, long-lasting ingredient in the homestead kitchen. Culturally, buttermilk has deep roots in Southern cooking, where it's used in everything from pancakes to fried chicken. It's a key ingredient in traditional recipes that evoke comfort and nostalgia. Nutritionally, it's lower in fat than whole milk, and its probiotics are great for digestion. Plus, it's full of calcium and vitamin B12, which are essential for bone health. So, putting your fruits in sugar to preserve them is an age-old trick that's been around forever. Are you interested in the know-how, though? Because it's actually a lot of neat little stuff working together to make sure you can get 1 or 2 days more out of that banana. So, first, we need to talk about a little something called osmotic pressure. Sugar tends to make an environment with a high amount of osmotic pressure, and this really draws water out of microbial cells, which includes things like bacteria and yeast. Microbes basically need their daily 8 glasses of water to live, or they'll die, and unlike us, they can't substitute that for a Coke and a cigarette. Sugar binds with molecules in water, and it robs those microorganisms of what they need to live. Pretty brutal, right? That's not sweet at all. I bet you didn't know how much sugar reduces it either, and your overall water activity actually goes below 0.85 plus. It also works as an antioxidant. What does that mean? Basically, the enzymes that are responsible for browning your fruit, ruining that perfectly ripe taste, sugar gets rid of that. All in all, it's your go-to solution for making your fruits last longer, look better, and taste fresher also. Just be cleaner overall. Really just a pit stop for your fruit basket. So, canned mincemeat was something you'd get for dirt cheap. I'm talking about barely 25 to 30 cents, which puts prices today to a world of shame. But who's comparing? I am. It hurts. We used to be a proper country. Boomers really did enjoy that time, and I can't blame them. You get chopped meat complete with spices and aromatics for that price, and you start to realize why and how these people were making pies every day. Anyway, you want to take a guess at how the mincemeat craze really started? When canned food first started appearing, the whole idea here was to advertise it in a way that really sold the "you don't need to work for your food anymore" factor. They'd say things like this'll help keep the wife out of the kitchen, and people would just eat it up, literally. Then you start having things like televisions roll around, where people largely just moved to things they could easily eat while watching and didn't take a long while to make. And you get how mincemeat became the iconic canned food it is today. Speaking of adding butter to the mix and elevating the dish, cheese has a pretty similar effect when you mix it with some scrambled eggs. It was one of the dreamiest breakfasts you could wake up to. The scent of freshly scrambled eggs forming a clear road that guided you to the kitchen, with each step taken increasing that early morning appetite. Once you sit, you are blessed with the glorious glow of cheese mixed with shining yolk and brilliant egg whites, scrambled to complete perfection mixed in with Grandma's special seasonings. That usually just meant a dash of paprika and oregano here and there. What was truly special, though, is how Grandma would manage to melt the cheese into the egg without compromising on how scrambled it was, which is an art lost to them now. You might think that boiled animal hooves are something that only a survivalist would eat, and indeed, during the Dust Bowl, they were the only thing keeping some families going. When meat became unaffordable and gelatin packets were a luxury, hooves came in handy, literally and metaphorically. Animal hooves, preferably cow or pig, were used and boiled to make a broth that was as useful and as ugly-sounding as it can get in our ears today. The long cooking process tenderized collagen present in hooves and made it into a natural binder for soups, stews, and even sweets. Yes, you heard it correctly, desserts. Gelatin from hooves was the secret behind the wobble in aspics, jellies, and custards. This was not about getting by. It was about getting the most out of each part of the animal. Hooves cooked were a rich source of protein and minerals and were a great food source during the lean periods. And even though they were not the most attractive, they ensured that bellies were filled and bodies were built. Today, such concepts as boiling hooves may cause some people to have goosebumps. However, in those days, it was business as usual. Dust Bowl meals were about subsistence, and at times, subsistence entails getting creative with what is available, or hoof. Before the days of freezers and two-door fridges, we had cold cellars, which you may also have heard being referred to as root cellars. For centuries, this was pretty much the cornerstone of not just America, but global society as a whole on how to preserve their food. Why was that, though? Most modern freezers actually try to replicate the environments people had in cold cellars. The temperatures you'd find in these frosty rooms would go down to 30 degrees and 50 degrees, and that meant that enzymatic activity, the same thing we just discussed that browns your bananas bad, goes down heavily in vegetables and fruits. Cold temperatures basically do the same for microbes too. Stunted growth is bad for anyone, not just kids that don't drink their milk. Plus, cold cellars have really high levels of humidity. Moisture retention is a big deal for these things, you know. You don't give them enough of that, they're liable to die way before they need to. Yet you've also heard that too much of the stuff is bad for you. You've probably heard your parents say not to keep your apples too close or around too much air, or keep your onions separate. Well, that's because of ethylene gas. With too much moisture and not enough ventilation, the buildup of this gas and the release of it causes a lot of nasty cross-contamination. Basically, you don't want your fruits being bad neighbors, and cold cellars were such a nice neighborhood too. Now, who could ever forget Campbell's soup? This is a household staple if I've ever heard of one, and it's a pretty magical thing when you think about it from the boomer's perspective. Today, we're spoiled. Let's face it, we are. We walk up to a store and get anything we want packaged, canned, or frozen, but all these goodies started somewhere, and Campbell's soup was one of the most popular and long-lasting brands to do it. It had this condensed soup that just needed water or milk added and came in accessible flavors like cream of mushroom, chicken noodle, and tomato. The range with this thing was insane. Did you know you could even use this soup as the base for a casserole or as its sauce? And all that for just 10 to 12 cents. Pretty good steal, right? Considering it wasn't just a meal, it was a lifesaver for busy moms and a comforting staple for families during tough times. The iconic red and white can became a symbol of good food, finding a place in nearly every pantry. Campbell's ads even taught clever recipes like turning cream of mushroom soup into a creamy pasta sauce or a gravy for meatloaf. Egg salad was another classic that people would often come home to when visiting their grandparents for Thanksgiving or just on the weekend in general. Egg salad typically consists of mayonnaise, mustard, and green onions, which add both color and crunch to the dish. When you think of a salad, your mind tends to immediately think boring and unimaginative, but egg salads can toss those opinions right out the window with just one bow, especially if your grandma left her recipe laying around in some journal or cookbook she compiled all throughout her life. Egg salad in particular would go very well with rye, and it would work as a sandwich too. Grandmas loved bringing this one along for family picnics. If you are considering giving up Starbucks as a hardship, just try making your coffee out of these plants. Dandelion coffee came into existence during the Dust Bowl when people could not afford coffee beans and other products. That's right. Those yellow flowers that appear on your lawn in spring and are so annoying once provided the means to satisfy caffeine cravings at the survival level. For it, people would uproot dandelions, bake the roots until they were black and toasty, and then pulverize them into a brew. There was no sugar or cream, just the natural taste of roasted roots. It was not as strong as real coffee, but it provided people with something warm to drink in the mornings when they were unsure about the future. Moreover, dandelions were free and easily available. No need to go to Starbucks. To the chagrin of dandelion coffee, it is now considered a health drink. Rich in antioxidants, it is believed to have liver benefits and can be found at health food stores for a hefty price. It was not about the latest fad diet or the newest way to live a healthier lifestyle. It was about not going insane without your cup of coffee in the morning. I can't help but wonder how the farmers of Dust Bowl must have been feeling sipping on this dandelion brew and hoping for a better tomorrow and a decent cup of coffee. Now it is a retro chic beverage, while back then, dandelion coffee was a means of getting back to the normal, even if the normal tasted like the grass one mows. So no one's a stranger to the process of larding, but I think a lot of us just follow these things because they're generational, tried and tested tips and tricks we know work. Why do they work though? Well, if you've ever played FIFA or a Dragon Age game, then you know the concept of a defender or a tank. Lard kind of acts like that. It makes a protective barrier of fat, which melts away when you cook. But when you just coat it, it seals it from any outside exposure. This helps oxidation basically never happen, which means you don't get any nasty-smelling meat or spoilage. Meat needs to be juicy too, though. Fat helps keep a lot of that water and moisture in, because who likes their steak dry? Plus, did you know some organisms that spoil your stuff actually really just get off of air? Lard really helps choke them out. When we were living in colonial times and people were still immigrating to the South and West, larded meats were even a sign of luxury and were a big part of our culture. It was impossible to make those long treks without a supply of properly preserved and fresh meat. But if you think that's all they had, you're sorely mistaken, my friend. Sometimes boomers would get tired of the regular routine and switch it up with Armour Star's barbecue ribs in a can. Yes, actual, well-made, pre-cooked saucy pork ribs in cans. These were meant to last and were made in a way that helped extend their shelf life. Ever wonder where the whole idea of preservatives started from? So, by the time of the 1940s and 1960s, the entire population had pretty serious battle scars from the Depression. Years of living off of crumbs and government rations will do that to you. What that did do was create an extended effect where even after peacetime began, people were still living by their frugal habits and mindsets. Everyone wanted what would save a buck, and canned food producers took note. There really is nothing like a grilled cheese sandwich, a meal that you have seen in the media, in kitchens, all over neighborhoods, in stalls and diners, and just about everywhere else. Sometimes you are in too much of a rush to make anything proper, or you just might only have some cheese and bread on hand. Everyone still needs to eat, but does that mean we have to wash down something we do not even like the taste of? No! And the popularity of grilled cheese sandwiches is a testament to that. But how did these sandwiches get so popular? Well, most Americans can only remember them as a loving meal that their grandmother would make in times exactly like what we described. The best part is that regardless of what kind of bread or cheese you like, every combo works just as well, which is something we cannot say about many dishes. What's for dinner? Oh, just a small something that came in from the backyard. Yes, the tumbleweed casserole was a real dish during the Dust Bowl, which just goes to show you that when the going gets tough, the tough make casseroles out of tumbleweeds. Tumbleweeds, those rolling shrubs of the Wild West screen, are actually technically, or at least partially, edible. Not fancy for the tongue, but we are hungry to the bone. Let's give it a try, edible. The process began with the boiling of the tumbleweed leaves to reduce their coarse feel and also to reduce the bitterness of the leaves. Then they'd get layered with whatever ingredients were available, maybe some scraps of meat, potatoes, or canned goods if you were lucky. The result? A surprisingly substantial, earthy flavored casserole that was as much about sustenance as it was about taste. Tumbleweed is very fibrous and even has a few vitamins in it, so it wasn't the worst thing to eat when fresh greens were scarce. Moreover, tumbleweeds were free and easy to come by, nature's grocery store if you will. Though you'll never see it on the dinner table. Tumbleweed casserole represents Dust Bowl endurance. Would I eat it? Well, I'd need a serious pep talk and a lot of seasoning. But hey, if the tumbleweed can take the hot winds, then it should not be a problem on my plate. Curing with nitrates has been another way of preserving meat. They did 3 things, and they did them really well. Those were preserving your meat's color, killing off any bacteria, and enhancing flavor. Pretty good all-rounder, right? Turns out, we used to deal with a pretty nasty illness known as botulism, which happened thanks to the rampant growth of Clostridium botulinum in meat. Lots to pronounce, but the gist of it is that this foodborne illness goes bye-bye when you cure meat with nitrates. Myoglobin in meat reacts with nitrates to overall just wipe out scores of bacteria. It's a real bloodbath if you look at it through a microscope, really. What's up with the color thing, though? Nitrates can actually help keep your ham, bacon, or whatever it is looking really vibrant and fresh, and that's all because it's a damn good curing agent. Oxidation is a real pain, and it can happen to you or any food you love. Nitrates have become so common now that we actually can't tell they enhance flavor anymore, but they do. Try having meat with none of that stuff put in. You'll immediately be able to tell the difference. It's because nitrites break nitric oxide down and form flavor compounds with amino acids in meat. This basically is what enhances its umami flavor and is something that industries keep trying to do to push certain flavor profiles forward. They're after you. Now this one's really going to blow your mind. Imagine a world where you can get Monarch Alaska King Crab for just 50 cents, or max $1. See, that's my kind of capitalism. These days you go out on a date, and the idea of either of you ordering the crab really sets your finances back for the remainder of the week. Back then, it was literally in abundance. I mean, you couldn't go a day without your friendly neighborhood fisherman catching a fat, juicy crab that was just begging to be boiled. Of course, that meant that canned crab was an idea that wasn't too far down the pipeline. It was made to preserve the sweetness we've come to love crab for, and it was used in all kinds of dishes. Crab casseroles, salads, as a dip, or even crab sandwiches. The options were pretty broad. I gotta say, it must have been easy to keep in shape when all the protein you could ever want is that easy to get. How about you? Think king crab something you'd fill your cabinets up with if you were born back in our parents' days? There are times where you just absolutely do not feel like getting up and doing anything, and in those times, microwaving some mac and cheese can be really helpful. We are sure most of us have memories of spending the nights at our grandparents' and waking up to some mac and cheese in the microwave, or coming home from school to a bowl that you could lose your worries in. The cheesier it was, the happier a kid would be after eating it, and even at this adult stage of life, a hot bowl can bring all those memories flooding right back in. Mac and cheese started growing in popularity when Mississippi farm families adopted it as a regular meal, and from there onwards it spread to a lot of families everywhere across the states. We thank God for that little fact every day, since we do not know what we would do without it. If you believe that eating insects is a modern sustainable practice, you are wrong. In the Dust Bowl, crispy fried grasshoppers were not a joke, they were a staple food. During the poor harvests, and when meat was hard to come by, farmers looked to the hordes of grasshoppers feeding on the crops. Talk about revenge dining. Hunting grasshoppers was a family event, and when you had gathered enough grasshoppers in a bucket, then the cooking process started. They were washed, marinated, and then fried to a crisp golden brown. The result? A crunchy snack that contained protein and was not too shabby if one didn't consider what they were consuming. Grasshoppers are in fact a form of superfood as they contain high protein, iron, and good fats. The Dust Bowl families were not consciously trying to innovate, but they were able to feed themselves in a way that many others could not. Also, if you fry anything, it automatically becomes at least 50% tastier, doesn't it? Nowadays, insects are being considered as a source of food, but in the past, crispy grasshoppers were a means of feeding oneself. You've heard this one 1,000 times before, and for good reason too. People dry their herbs because it's simply one of the best, oldest, and most effective ways of removing any excess moisture, keeping all that icky, bacterial nonsense off of your herbs, and making sure that your greens last as long as you need them to. You're here for the why, though, and that's what I'm here to answer for you. When you dry herbs, you reduce their overall water content. As we've discussed already, a bunch of harmful bacteria and microorganisms desperately need water and air to survive, and in that regard, they're really not so different from us. Volatile oils, on the other hand, are what give herbs and aromatics their flavor and scents. This is why you've probably heard folk tips, such as boiling herbs to clear out odors. High temperatures cause these essentials to leak out, so the opposite, which in this case is proper drying, actually helps maintain these oils in the herbs, sealing all that flavor and fragrance in. In Native American traditions, their herbalists used to dry herbs to ensure that treatments, ointments, medicinal balms, and herb-based remedies were available to the community all year round. Yarrow and chamomile, for example, were and still are big-time staples of household remedies. During World War II, these practices were adopted by the mainstream to help victory gardens provide more produce that would last longer as well. So, it might be a basic trick, but it's got a lot of benefits and history behind it. Speaking of casserole, this one's a mouthful to say, but trust me, it's worth the effort. Neo-Life. Nest dehydrated Stroganov casserole was this pre-made mix that just needed water added to it so you could get rid of that icky dehydration part of the whole deal. I get why they did it, because canned food that can't last is like a fish that can't swim. Kind of redundant, so it's all right. Plus, this thing always gets a pass for how close it actually came to imitating the flavor of a real casserole made from scratch. You had a creamy, beefy Stroganov Cassie, which you could obviously tell is processed, but for what it was worth, which was just $1 or $2, and the amount of value you got out of it, nobody was complaining about a little bit of a powdery aftertaste. Stroganov is definitely something that was more popular in their time, though. Have you eaten much of it, or is it something you regularly get a plate of? Buttered noodles are a dish so strongly associated with the elderly that they even have another name. Introducing Grandma's noodles, which were a staple of any family gathering back when simple dishes like this were still enough to leave a great impression on everyone at the table. The eggs made you feel great because they added a very warm feeling to the dish, as well as being great for you. The butter itself was just the right touch that the dish needed and brought out the chewy sensation of the noodles so much more, and the overall flavor was something a mix between creamy chicken noodles and chicken cooked in butter, shredded and diced with vegetables. It screamed love in every sense of the word because it was a dish that took effort and, more than anything else, a lot of attention to detail to nail. But if that's the job, then there's no one better for it than the grandmas of the country. If you always believed that only the drippings can be used to make gravy, then you are wrong. Blood gravy was a Dust Bowl staple that created a meal from the most unappetizing of ingredients: animal blood. Sound intense? It was. But back then, farmers couldn't afford to waste a single drop, literally. Blood gravy was produced by drawing fresh blood from animals, particularly pigs or cows, and then mixing it with flour, milk, and spices to make it into a thick paste that was served as a relish. Served over biscuits or potatoes, it was rather tasty and rich in nutrients, which came as a complete shock. During a period when people suffered from a lack of iron, blood gravy was, in fact, a sort of multivitamin. This dish was both a product of ingenuity and the expenditure of a considerable amount of effort. Getting the blood was not easy, but the meal was filling. For today's food lovers, it may be hard to swallow, but blood-based recipes are not something new to the culinary world, since there is blood pudding from Sweden and dinuguan from the Philippines. Would you try it? Seriously, I can take it if it's presented on a fluffy biscuit, and if it's well seasoned, I might be willing to try it. Dust Bowl cooks were masters of turning nothing into something, and blood gravy is a perfect example of that adage. So I'm sure you've seen this in movies before, but clay pot cooling was a real thing. It's a pretty vintage cooling technique, but it just takes some smart advantage of the properties of clay. Since clay happens to be a material with more pores than it knows what to do with, water tends to reach the outer surface easily enough. Imagine really tiny channels of water that give a very slow but steady supply of water to the inside surface. Since the water is ultimately so little, though, it tends to evaporate and create an environment where it absorbs heat and turns to a vapor, something you may or may not know as the endothermic process. This evaporation is pretty much what creates a lower temperature and humidity inside the pot and helps create that natural refrigerator effect that made this such a genius way of preserving everything and anything all inside an easily transportable and carryable pot. This is still an active tradition in many parts of the world, but in America, historically, settlers used pots to keep waters and fruits cold and fresh before ice boxes were ever a thing. Throughout the Depression, the war, and every little bit of chaos after, canned bread was a constant friend, ally, and supporter of the American people. This dense, sweet, and spongy bread used to get that way thanks to a neat little trick known as steaming before canning, which really helped it retain that airy, sponge-like texture. This was used in war for soldiers as a part of government rations, and even organizations like the Red Cross would have it during many of their food drives. For just 20 or 25 cents, you could get some pretty decent bread, and the entire idea of this was to market how practical and convenient it is. I gotta say, it worked because people bought it in droves. Seriously, go ask your mom and dad about how much people used to get canned bread back in the day and how it was used for rations. They pretty much paired it with things like Campbell's soup or used it as a side for other dishes that involved bread. Not everybody even had an oven back then, and in an era with an increasing focus on hustling and grinding your way into a nice little retirement, the appeal of baking bread from scratch for a few hours wasn't really something people were too into. So here is a dish that you may not see coming or be prepared for, but it actually works really well this way too. We are talking about peanut butter jelly and banana toast, which is exactly what it sounds like. You take some toast, preferably toast until it's crunchy, then lather it with as much peanut butter and jelly as you desire, and layer it with sliced bananas. You may have only heard of that combo as a part of some protein shake or smoothie, but it works just as well sitting on top of bread as it does in a glass. This is also a perfectly refreshing option for when you are low on work, and grandmas obviously kept that in mind. When they could just tell that somebody in the household needed a sugar rush and a kick from behind to get them into high gear, they would feed them a lot more toast than was probably wise, but it would work every time. Yes, you heard it here first, skunk stew. Even when the Dust Bowl left dinner plates empty, people were not the only ones who could not escape being eaten, not even skunks. Now, before you start gagging, let me explain. Skunks were not the preferred source of protein, but when the resources were scarce, the farmers made do with whatever they could hunt down. Cooking skunk stew was not for the faint-hearted. First, you had to, de-skunk the skunk. It was mandatory to have the scent glands removed unless one wanted the house cleared faster than a tornado. After washing, it was cooked with what vegetables and spices were available. The result? A rather soft and gamey meal that was palatable though, but not one that would make me eagerly look forward to the next meal. Skunks may sound like the butt of some jokes, but these animals were a good source of protein food when all else was scarce. And can you imagine? A skunk was not as smelly as other wild games like raccoon or possum. Talk about a backhanded compliment. While skunk stew appears to be the epitome of the challenge-accepted food that is popular today for the survivors of the Dust Bowl, it was a symbol of survival. They made desperation into dinner. As they say, where there is life, there is a chance to live, and sometimes to live, you have to eat the wild, literally. Again, with wax sealing jars, the same thing holds true. An age-old concept that was actually far ahead of its time. It's all just a pretty clever use of the natural properties of these things, really. Wax forms a barrier between air and your food, and that means you don't have to worry about any airborne contamination or any bacteria getting the air they need to survive. Plus, what a lot of people would do is melt the wax and pour it over the food. Cold isn't the only thing you can trap inside things like ice houses. You can do the same to heat in things like melted wax. Not only would this sterilize the wax, it would kill off most bacteria on the surface of the jar too. There were loads of cultural traditions around farm families that basically let them use wax jars as much as they could, alongside a strong artistic appeal. Some people would use specialty wax jars for high-quality jams, honey, or other kinds of gourmet products. In the 70s, there was kind of a return for things like this, but they couldn't keep up with modern technology, so they eventually were left behind once again. Are you just as shocked as I am by these food items? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe.